Peter, what's your reading of the status of those infection numbers today in New South Wales? Is the Premier right about green shoots starting to emerge?
Well, I think there's some optimistic features. First of all, the cases aren't rising exponentially, they're flattening. Now, whether they'll stay flattened, it'll be obvious over the next few days. And what we want is them to come down. But this isn't going the way that people were predicting, say, a week ago, that it just go up and up and up and up. And if you look at the eastern suburbs of Sydney in particular, where it all started, there's been a gradual decrease in the number of new cases each day. So that's a good sign. Fairfield, southwest Sydney is still a concern. But again, we'll just have to wait and see. Does it stabilise? And hopefully the numbers will come down. But this is not out of control. It's not under control yet either. But, I think there are glimmers of hope that this will flatten out and then the numbers will go down.
So with what you're saying, does that mean that we might see a real decline in numbers, say, at the beginning of next week?
Well, I think, the more stringent messages and other things came out really last Friday and Saturday. And anything you do, whether it's to decrease restrictions or put them up, takes 5 to 7 days to see the effect, because the average incubation period is about 5 days. So I think we'll get a clearer idea what's happening maybe tomorrow or Saturday as to where it's going. At least so far, it seems to be levelling off. I don't think you can pay much attention to going down one day. It's really what happens over, say, a 3-day average. But so far, it's looking like, we might be getting on top of this or should be getting on top of this, but it'll be another, 4 or 5 days before we really know. And then what we want to do is see a trend going down and staying that way, so that we get down to, say, 10 or 15 cases per day, with nearly all of them in isolation. That will be then very reassuring that we're getting on top of this.
We got information this afternoon from the Victorian Premier that entire state, intends to shut down over 18 cases. They're worried that these second-tier contacts from the MCG are infected, and so therefore that's the next 2,000 or 3,000 people that could need to be isolated. From what you've seen of those numbers and what they've done this afternoon, it does prove that Delta is a different proposition altogether, right?
Well, it does spread more readily, but it still spreads the same way. It spreads more frequently, for instance, in households. When they followed up 15,000 people in England with the Delta variant, about 12.4% of people living in the same household became infected, which was more than the previous variants. But equally, the trouble with big football matches may not be when you're at the football match itself, but it's in the toilets or getting drinks, or how do you get there and which is the pub you went to afterwards, all those sorts of things. So, big venues with big crowds mean people are crowded together, often indoors, because that's much more risky than outdoors. So, that'll be an issue for the next couple of months, actually, everywhere in Australia. But overall, these short lockdowns, basically, it depends what it's done for. If it's done just to help contact tracers, while the numbers are low, you would think you could actually get on top of that with good contact tracing. And so far in Australia and New Zealand, all the short lockdowns, as far as I'm aware, haven't found more cases. If you're doing it because there may be mystery cases or cases out there you haven't found, you probably have to do it for more than 5 or 7 days, even think about 14 days, because if the average incubation period is 5 days, there'll be an equal number that occur after 5 days, up to 12 or 13 days. So it always depends what you're doing it for. And particularly doing the whole state of Victoria, you think again, isn't Melbourne the risk here? You look at Sydney, there really hasn't been any regional spread in New South Wales yet. So, I think if you put the restrictions where most of the infections are likely to be, one would hope you could control it in the rest of the state if you've got good contact tracing and a cooperative public.
You published a really good story on social media through the week about the odds of death generally in the community, as opposed to the odds of death from AstraZeneca. And of course, AstraZeneca is 1 in 2 million. It puts it in context, and everyone should have a look at those odds, shouldn't they?
Well, yeah, look, I think we tend to have a problem with our risk perspective. I mean, look, vaccines are great, and we'd all like to be 100% effective and 0% side effects, but there's no drug or vaccine like that. So, yes, the AstraZeneca vaccine came up with this very rare and unexpected side effect that wasn't seen in the original studies that involved tens of thousands of people. But about 1 in 60,000 people, even 1 in 100,000 people, more of you younger, get this funny clotting disorder associated with low platelets, which in Australia translates to so far about 1 death for every 2 million doses you give. But for instance, if you're a 50-year-old taking regular aspirin to prevent heart disease and you don't have any risk factors, your risk of dying from just doing that is about 1 in 100,000 per year. And there's lots of things that we do are much more dangerous than the AstraZeneca's vaccine from a death perspective that we don't even think about. So look, if you're over the age of 70 and you get COVID, your chance of dying is about 2 in 100, sorry. And much, much higher than your risk of the vaccine. Now, you might say, oh, it won't spread, but that's, I think, not very realistic. So we need to get this in better perspective because there's still about 30% of people over the age of 70 who haven't received their first dose of vaccine. And I know from personal experience, some people are worried about the clots. Well, compared to the risk of COVID, the benefits of the vaccine so far outweigh the risks to you if you're 70 or over. You are silly, in my view, not to get vaccinated. People who are younger, we still don't have enough enough Pfizer vaccine, but that should all change in the next couple of months. So, look, we should be able to get the vast majority of adults in Australia vaccinated before the end of October, November, mostly even with 2 doses. That actually means winter and early spring will be over, so there'll be less spread of respiratory viruses anyway. Plus, we'll have a lot more people protected. So there is a light at the end of this tunnel here, but the way to get to the end of the tunnel is to get lots of people vaccinated when they can access vaccines, which for people over the age of 60 is not a problem. So go out and get vaccinated. There's enough AstraZeneca vaccine. For people under 50, the vaccines are coming. You might have to wait a couple of months, but we should be able to control the spread of this virus until then. And then we'll protect the vast majority of people in Australia with very safe and very, very effective vaccines.
Excellent summation. Professor Collignon, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.